Hey, I'm glad you're back with us again as we make another video on how to make really professional quality woodcraft products using very inexpensive materials and equipment. And this time we're going to be making little pumpkins. Um, I'm going to show you how to uh, turn a pumpkin like this and then also put the grooves into it in this video. I'm going to end up making two of them because my wife is going to be using them for decoration. But this is a very timely project as we go into the fall part of the year. And we're just going to be making little pumpkins like this that people can use to decorate their house. Now I have a variety of blocks of wood that I can use for this project, and I just have them stacked over here on the side of the shop. I think I'm going to use a block like this for this project. You can actually make two pumpkins out of this. I'll show you how to do that in the video. And so you're not going to be wasting a lot of wood on a big block like this and then just get one pumpkin. You can get two pumpkins out of this. So let's head over to the lathe and I'll just show you how to do this. All right. Well, this is the block that I have chosen to use. This is a piece of oak. You can see I've sealed the ends. That's what that darker, shiny part there on the ends is just where I have sealed the wood. You have seen me in the past do what I'm doing here, which is I'm just rounding off those corners. I do not really have a bandsaw that I can use to make more rounded type pieces, and so I just cut the blocks primarily with just a chainsaw, and then to get the corners rounded off I just use this hand planer. So you can see now that I've kind of got those corners rounded. That's just going to help with being able to just round this entire wood block. What I'm using here is just a spindle gouge. I've said before I don't use typically a roughing gouge. If I had a roughing gouge, I wouldn't really need to round off those corners quite so much. But if you're just going to use a spindle gouge, well, you need to round those corners off. Otherwise, it's going to catch all the time, and it just ends up being a problem. Here we can see that I have gotten a lot of the flat edges rounded now, still just using that spindle gouge, turning it more round. I'm using a fairly small tool rest. I will use my longer tool rest later on in the video. But right now, I'm just working on 4 or 5 inch sections at a time, so the smaller tool rest really is fine. But this is a mini lathe. It costs, you can get this lathe at Grizzly for about $500. So this is not a $10,000 lathe by any stretch. In addition, the spindle gouge that I'm using is under $10. A little bit of a catch there. I might need to resharpen my spindle gouge here shortly. I will tell you this oak is really, really dry, and it's pretty hard. So I will have to sharpen my tools fairly regularly. Now that I've gotten it rounded off a little bit more, you can see I sped up the lathe so that the block is turning considerably faster now, and it'll just make it just easier to finish rounding off this block of wood with a higher speed. You do have to be somewhat careful with a fairly large block of wood on a MIDI lathe, which is what this is. This is a MIDI lathe, M-I-D-I. That lathe is attached to the workbench, but even at that, if it's not pretty balanced, it can cause some shaking. You can also see when I was had it stopped there, I've got a few cracks in the wood. Ordinarily, I would not want those cracks, and I would repair them in a way that I can show you in a different video. But with these little small pumpkins, you know, a lot of times they're put outside, even in the house where we're going to be keeping ours. It's a rougher product. So if I were making something that needed to be more delicate, more perfect, without the flaws, without the blemishes, well, I would use a different piece of wood. Okay, you can see we've got it rounded off now. And I'm just going to true up the end here. You know, some people don't worry about these ends quite as much as I do. You'll see I'm going to true up both ends, even though I'm only going to put a tenon on one end. This is the end I'm going to be putting the tenon on. So I need to get it flattened out. But it's just the way I do my woodwork. I will always, or nearly always, true up both ends. I've got to get a tenon because I am going to attach this to a chuck, and so I've got to get the tenon. It's got to be the right width. I got to take a little bit more off. That's probably enough. Yeah, okay, so the width is fine on the tenon now. I need to make the tenon a little deeper. I don't want to go too awfully deep on this end, but I need to get a little bit more tenon so that the chuck can grab a hold of it. And then I will put the little dovetail component onto the tenon. So you can see right now I'm using a detailed gouge to put that dovetail on onto that tenon. And that's just going to help the chuck get a good grasp on that tenon. You can also see this is a pretty good size block of wood for this MIDI lathe. So even after I attach it to the chuck, I'm still going to be pulling up that tailstock, which you'll see shortly. So that takes care of that dovetail tenon. So here's the other end of that block of wood. And like I said, I tend to just true up both ends, even though it's technically, again, not necessary, but that's just the way I tend to do this. It's pretty uneven there on that end. You can see it's, I'm going to have to do a little bit of work in getting this trued up. Since I'm not making a tenon, I'm just going to true it up right there to the center of the block. And I don't think that's perfect. But it's good enough. At this point, I'm going to start laying out the pumpkins. This is going to be where I'm working right now. This is going to be the stem end of the pumpkin, and so I just need to take some wood off there. I need to take it down to a fairly narrow stem. In addition, I've got to give myself some room to work. Now, as we go through this project, I'm just going to tell you that you have to kind of visualize it in your mind, because I don't typically work with specific measurements. I tend to make the pumpkin what the wood will allow me to make it. And so sometimes the measurements work, sometimes they don't. Now, if I were making a snowman or something, I would use measurements a little bit more. But with something like this, I'm just visualizing the pumpkin and what the top of the pumpkin will be, what the bottom of the pumpkin will be. I'm working on the bottom of the pumpkin right now. So the top of the pumpkin, I've gotten it somewhat rounded off. Now I've got to start working on the bottom of the pumpkin. Also, keep in mind, I'm going to make 2 pumpkins off of this. So I have to make first off, some room for me to work. So I've got to get the bottom of the pumpkin, of the first pumpkin, continue to get that rounded off. And I also have to start getting the stem for the second pumpkin, which is going to just be laying right there next to it. You'll see it later on in the video. But one of the hardest parts of this project is the room. You just don't have a lot of room to work, and so you're going to have to take off more wood than you might think that you need to, simply because I just got to get wood out of the way so that I can get my tools in there and turn these products. So you can sort of see where the bottom of the first pumpkin is going to end, and now I'm getting some room so that I can work on the bottom of that pumpkin, and that room will also serve as the stem for the second pumpkin. And the more you do this project, the better the feel you'll get for, how much room do you need. I know when I first started making these, I always worried, oh, do I have enough room to make the second pumpkin? And you do. You have room, but you do have to be somewhat careful, because again, you can see the outline of that first pumpkin. I've got to fit a stem, a second pumpkin, and still have some room to work on the bottom on that second pumpkin. And I've got to fit all that in. Right now, I'm using a parting tool. And I use that parting tool really to put a separation between the first pumpkin and the second pumpkin. Now you can see I'm back up working on the top of the first pumpkin. If you look at a pumpkin, it'll round over at the top, and it actually, before it attaches onto the stem, it'll kind of have a concaved region, and actually dips down into the pumpkin and then just has a smooth transition to the stem. And that's what I'm doing right here. I'm using, that would be a bowl gouge. So I'm just using a bowl gouge to put that concave region up at the top, and that concave region will also lead to the stem. And So there you can see that's why I'm sort of digging into the top of that pumpkin to give it that concave area. You can also see this is the way I make pumpkins. Look, pumpkins are organic organisms. They come in all different shapes and sizes, but I typically make a pumpkin that's a little wider at the top of the pumpkin and then tapers in as you go towards the bottom. And so you can see that on my pumpkin. It has the widest part up at the shoulder of the pumpkin. And that's just helping me just sort of get the overall shape of the pumpkin. Right here, I am giving myself a little bit more room to work because I have to now work on the bottom of the pumpkin. And the bottom of the pumpkin is also going to have a little bit of a concave region. You don't necessarily have to do that. It's going to be sitting on the bottom, so no one's really going to be paying any attention to it. But I typically put a little bit of a concave area on the bottom too. That means I'm going to have to be able to get my tools in from the side. I need some room to do that, and so that's what I'm doing right there. Taking a break on the top pumpkin, and now I'm starting to lay out the bottom pumpkin, the second one. You can see I'm taking some wood off there at the end, at the bottom of that second pumpkin. I've got to be able to work now on that on the bottom of the second pumpkin, and I've got to get some wood out of the way. You can also see that I am running out of room. You can get 2 pumpkins on here, but there's not a lot of excess room that you're going to have left over. Right here I'm using just a scraper. And the reason I'm doing this, you can see on that bottom pumpkin, the width of the pumpkin is pretty much even between the top and the bottom. In fact, the widest part is kind of in the middle. And again, that's not the way I like to make pumpkins. I like to make them so that the widest part is up at the top. I could have used a spindle gouge or a bowl gouge to basically, I'm just tapering off that bottom part. You can see now the top shoulder is the widest part. I'm just using a scraper to do that. Okay, so I sort of skipped ahead, so you don't have to see all the details of everything that I've done. And I'm now going to start finishing the bottom of the first pumpkin. I am using a parting tool to do that. Remember, I'm trying to give myself a little bit of a concave appearance on that bottom of that pumpkin. And so the parting tool is the one I'm using. I also, right there, you can see I am using that parting tool, the edge of that parting tool, as a sort of a scraper to just smooth out the bottom region of that pumpkin. I'm going to use a scraper and just smooth the whole thing out before I sand it. But just that one little section there at the bottom, I was just using the edge of that parting tool. So just skipped ahead there. Y'all didn't really need to see me using a scraper to smooth the pumpkin. And now I'm just going to do a little bit of final sanding. I didn't show you the first part of the sanding, but I'm just doing some final sanding. And you can see the first pumpkin versus the second pumpkin. And I have the first pumpkin pretty much finished. And now I'm just going to part it off, and I'll just remove it so that I can finish working on the second pumpkin. So right there, I'm parting it on the bottom. And then I'll be moving to the top. I still have to part it off there at the stem, and so I can remove that pumpkin. All right, so here's what they look like. You can see sort of that concave region at the top and the bottom. This is the second pumpkin. I've already put some of the little grooves into it. Until you paint it, the grooves just make it look kind of like it's just damaged wood. But once it's painted, it really does look very much like a pumpkin once you have those grooves in there. I have made pumpkins without the grooves, and even if you paint them orange, they still almost just look like an apple, just an orange apple. So if you don't put the grooves in there, it's not going to really look quite as much like a little pumpkin. Here are my carving chisels. This is a fairly inexpensive set. I don't use it very often. Um, I think I spent about $40 on the whole set. So it's not, it's not a situation where you have to spend a huge amount of money. And I think there's 7 or 8 chisels in there. And I just use the chisels to put a sort of a V-shaped groove. You can see where one is, I've already got one started there. And uh, just chiseling a groove into this. This is really hard wood. This oak is pretty hard, so I'm going to be using a mallet. At some point in the future, I'll show you how to make a mallet on a lathe. I've made lots of different mallets, and that one really seems to work the best for me, that shape. And so I'm just using a mallet to kind of drive that chisel through the wood because it is so hard. Once you get the V-shaped groove, you can use a flatter chisel if you want, or you can use sandpaper. I'm going to use this little Dremel tool um, with a little sanding end attached to it, and I'm just smoothing that out. What you don't want is just a V-shaped groove. It's not going to really look like a pumpkin. A pumpkin does have a little groove that goes from the top to the bottom there on the side, but it's kind of a smoothed out groove. And so what you want is you want to get the V-shaped groove in there, and then after that, smooth it out. And so that's what I'm doing. I tried different ways of smoothing this out. Like I said, you can use just a flatter chisel to do it, but I have found that just sanding it works probably the best. Um, there you can see I'm just sort of extending that groove to the bottom, the actual bottom of the pumpkin, and now just smoothing it out a little bit more. But this is just to make one individual groove. Now I'm taking the groove and taking it all the way up to the top, so that the groove extends really almost to the stem. I have been asked at times, well, can you just use the Dremel tool completely and not use the chisels? And you can. I have done that, but putting the groove in there first, uh, to me, seems to work a little bit better, and then just using a sanding apparatus of some kind to sort of smooth it out so that it's not a sharp groove. There you can see the difference. I showed you one where it was smoothed out and one where it was a little bit sharper. I'm going to just show you how you can do this. And all you're doing is just holding that chisel onto the wood and using the mallet to just drive that chisel through the wood to make that groove. I probably need to sharpen my chisel some. Like I said, I don't use them very often, so I don't spend a lot of time sharpening them. They probably, at least the ones that I use more regularly, probably need to be sharpened some. But they're sharp enough that I was able to do this to do this project. And that's sort of what it looks like whenever you finish with the chisel. And now I'm just going to smooth it all out with the Dremel tool. I told you you could use just some sandpaper. If you did decide to do that, you'd probably want to use a sanding pad of some kind. Just sandpaper by itself is probably not going to be very effective, but if you had a sanding pad, uh, that does seem to work a little bit better. Here I'm just kind of smoothing out the entire groove. I would recommend that you wear a mask. You can see the wood dust that comes up into the air, and it does get in your nose. I'm wearing safety glasses because it also gets into your eyes and so forth. I probably should have worn a different shirt, but that's the kind of shirts that I wear sometimes, most of the time when I'm doing woodworking. But in the future, I will try to wear a shirt that doesn't have holes all in it. And again, you can see I'm just extending that groove up at the top almost to the stem, and now just smoothing out that that area. And you're typically going to have to do probably 7 or 8, 6, 7, 8 little grooves if you want it to really look like a pumpkin. So, just doing 4 grooves, one, at 90 degrees from each other, really isn't going to look like a pumpkin. But if you do 6 to 8 grooves, it looks pretty good. And that's basically how long it takes to make a little groove. So I'm just skipping ahead there and showing you the final sanding that I was doing. That's really what it looks like. You get the initial shape on the lathe, and then you put the little grooves with the chisel, the carving chisels, and then I use that little Dremel tool to sort of smooth it all out. Typically, I will just take some sandpaper. That is 220 sandpaper, and I just go over the whole thing very quickly to just sort of blend everything together. This is the painting process. My wife is doing the painting, and you can see she's taped off the stems. We're just going to leave the stems brown, the regular wood color. And if you decided to do stems that were green, well, you would just need to paint them separately, but we just left the stems a brown color. And you just do some light coatings on the pumpkins. Once you have them painted, you really need to do something to kind of help those grooves stand out. And what she has found works really well is chalk. And so she just takes a little stick of chalk and draws a chalk line down the groove. You can see she's doing that. And then she just takes one of those little foam sponge paint brush type things, and she just sort of blends that chalk in there. And that's what you end up with. You end up with 2 pumpkins, and you can see really the shape again came from the lathe. I put the grooves in, and then my wife put the paint on and put the chalk on there, and you end up with really some nice looking crafts. Here is a picture of those two pumpkins sitting on our kitchen table right there with a candle stand, just to show you some ideas of what you could do with that type of little project, those pumpkin projects. Most of the time when we do something like this, though, we tend to combine the pumpkin with leaves. This is a fall project, and so using some fall colored leaves typically looks pretty good. It doesn't have to be pumpkin leaves, but just using some fall leaves typically looks a little bit better. And then you can see the final project sitting on the dining room table, the two pumpkins side by side with the leaves, and it just makes a, just kind of a little decorative area there on the table. Hey, I hope you enjoyed seeing how to make these little pumpkin projects. They really are popular. People come over to our house. They nearly always comment on these little pumpkins that we make, and they sell really well, especially in the fall time of the year. Other times of the year they don't sell quite as well, but in the fall time of the year, these sell really well. Again, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. I ask that you would subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and just hit that like button if you enjoyed the video. And I will see you next time. Bye-bye.